This is a GTX 1070 Ti. It was released back in November of 2017 and it's almost a 7-year-old GPU now. So today I'm going to be testing it out and seeing how it holds up in 2024. When it originally launched, it had an MSRP of $399 and now this GPU could be bought for around 120 USD. Your boy got pretty lucky and I found one on my Facebook marketplace and I scored it for $80. It's a Zotac mini model and it looks pretty sick. Since it was used, it was quite dusty and a little piece of the bracket is snapped off, but for 80 bucks, this is a steal and it should make an awesome budget gaming rig. The specs on this card are pretty decent. It's rocking 8 GB of VRAM, and that's plenty for some 1080p gaming. Before testing, I did a quick simple cleaning on my GPU, and these are the tools I used. Electric air duster. I use this first to knock off any loose dust in the fans and the heat sinks. This electric screwdriver is obviously used for taking it apart. It has a magnetic tip and swappable bits, which is nice because sometimes GPUs will have different size screws. Then I use alcohol wipes to wipe off any old thermal paste and wipe away any dust or gunk that the air duster didn't get. Then the final tool is some fresh thermal paste. You can go the extra mile and replace the thermal pads as well, but most of the time thermal paste is enough. If your thermal pads look like they're all messed up, then go ahead and just replace them. Now that my 1070 Ti is nice and clean, it's looking a whole lot better than it was. And for testing, this is the PC I'm using. It's nothing crazy, but it will allow our GPU to spread its little legs. It's an i5-12400F and 16 GB of RAM clocked at 3200 MHz. This video is sponsored by Super CDK. If you just recently built a computer and you need a Windows key, then visit them down below. They sell Windows 10, Windows 11, and even discounted game keys. Add whatever key you want to your cart and be sure to use the discount code SPLA to save a little bit of extra money on checkout. Once you get the product key, all you do is copy and paste it into your activation settings, click activate, and bam, Windows is now activated. Thank you Super CDK for sponsoring this video, and be sure to check them out down below. For some quick tests, I ran a time spy and it got a graphics score of 6,838 and an overall score of 7,136. Then I ran a Unigine Heaven benchmark at 1080p with the Ultra preset and it averaged 184 FPS with a score of 4,649. Now for the actual gaming benchmarks, and let me tell you, I'm impressed with this little GPU. In Fortnite, I first tried loading in and playing with the high settings preset, but honestly, it was unplayable. I mean, in my opinion. Of course, you can argue and say, how are you playing it then? But nah, it was a choppy mess. If the Xbox 360 had Fortnite, it would have been better. But hey, on the plus side, it looked really good, almost like Minecraft with shaders on. After dropping the settings from high to medium, it did give us a nice performance boost, but the real gains happened when I tweaked the settings a little bit more. I kept it at the same medium preset, but changed anti-aliasing from TSR Epic to TAA and set the 3D res scale to 100%. With those settings, the game was more playable for sure, and this would give me a better chance at going pro if I was a sweat, but as you can see, I'm not a sweat. Fortnite was honestly harder to run than I thought. The 1070 Ti walked away with 130 FPS average and a 1% low of 34. In Apex Legends, I tested at 1080p with TAA on, ultra settings for the textures, and then everything else was basically set at the default settings. I was playing in a control match, so FPS numbers might differ from a normal BR game, but either way, it was playing pretty smooth and was offering a great balance between visuals and performance. And on the plus side, I was hitting some shots and it averaged 133 FPS with a 1% low of 82. Up next in GTA 5 at 1080p, I had all the settings set to the highest, FXAA was on, and under advanced settings, I turned on everything. I did what I always do in GTA, and I was just having a good time running people over and being a straight menace. The game was averaging well above 144 FPS, but it was having bad lag spikes. Every time I test GTA and it reaches above 144 FPS, it always lags. I'm not sure if the game launcher just doesn't like it, or if I'm doing something wrong. After turning on VSync though, and capping the FPS, the game was running a whole lot smoother and the lag spikes were gone. I had a nice shootout with the cops averaging 142 FPS with a 1% low of 71. In Call of Duty Warzone at 1080p with the Ultra settings preset, let me tell you, I was super impressed with this. At first I was gonna test with the balance preset, but then I was like, nah, let me just try out Ultra. The GTX 1070 Ti held its own and did pretty good. It got an 83 FPS average with a 1% low of 60. So the little 1070 Ti holds up pretty well in some esports and easier to run titles, but how does it do with AAA titles? First up is Cyberpunk. I ran the in-game benchmark at 1080p with the high settings preset and it ran really good. For a story-based game, 60 FPS is basically the minimum you want, and we were averaging 68 FPS with a 1% low of 55. In Forza Horizon 5, I tested at 1080p with the Ultra preset and I had TAA turned on. It's not a super demanding game compared to the other AAA titles, but it can be harder on older hardware. Running the built-in benchmarking tool, we averaged 61 FPS with a 1% low of 50, and honestly that that's pretty impressive considering it's at ultra settings, but if you wanted to achieve more FPS, you could drop the settings to the high preset, and with that, the system averaged 78 FPS with a 1% low of 62. Overall, I think high settings is the best option for this game. It still provides really great visuals, but it takes away any chance of the game dipping below a 60 FPS average, which in turn will give you a more enjoyable gaming experience. Hogwarts Legacy is up next, and out of all the times I've tested this game, it's been the most demanding out of all my game options. But at 1080p with the high settings preset, it was playing above 60 FPS. I also had TAA set to low, and with these settings, we got a pretty nice balance between visuals and decent performance. The game looked really good, but the 1% lows were basically half of our 60 FPS average, and with it being a story mode game, I would just cap it to 60 FPS, and if you don't want to play at high settings, you could drop the settings and get a nice bump in FPS. Overall, this GPU held its own, and it's safe to say that this card won't be obsolete, at least for another year. Did you expect more or less from this little 1070 Ti? Let me know your thoughts down below. In my opinion, this GPU is a great option for people wanting to purchase a GPU for around $100. It all depends on what kind of performance you want. If you want a GPU that can handle games at 1080p with at least a 60 FPS average without having to sacrifice too much on the visuals, then I would recommend maybe picking up a GTX 1070 Ti. Now, of course, don't overpay for the card. I personally wouldn't pay more than $100, because once you start getting closer to like the $120 price range to $160 price range, you can start getting some really nice budget GPUs that are on par with the RTX 3060. Anyways, I'll have a link for the GPU down below if you want to get one for yourself. But if you enjoyed the video, then smash the like button, subscribe if you loved it, and if you actually want to see me buy this GTX 1070 Ti for 80 bucks, then watch this video next.